Tere kõigile vaatajatele ning tere tulemast Euroopa Elamiskeskusesse, mis asub siin Tallinnas ning mis tutvustab Euroopa Liitu ja Euroopa Parlamenti. Tänase videotunni teemaks on siis Euroopa Parlament ning täpsemalt lähemal ajal, 9. juunil saabuvad Euroopa Parlamendi valimised. Minu nimi on Anno Aetma, töötan Euroopa Parlamendi Eesti esinduses ning minu kõrval istub Steve Clark, kes on siis Euroopa Parlamendi kõigi büroode juhataja siis liikmesriikides. Hello, Steve.
Hi.
Hello. I made a brief introduction about the elections that are coming, the European Parliament elections, and also about you and as the director for the European Parliament offices in different European EU countries. May I firstly ask to introduce yourself more about what are your tasks in directing the European Parliament offices?
Okay, well, I'll start by saying who I am. I'm Steve Clark, as I think you said. I'm British by origin and by passport still, and this is not so strange. I'm still working in the European Union. I've been an official of the European Parliament for 33 years now, so time is passing. So I've done a lot of different things while working in the Parliament, but my recent roles have been in communication. And currently, indeed, as you said, I'm responsible for all of these offices around Europe, which means I get to travel quite a lot, try and coordinate the work, but also understand what's going on around Europe, how we need to talk to people, how we communicate in the different ways that we need to do the job in different places, because of course, you know, Tallinn is not like Lisbon, is not like Rome. So everywhere needs its own tonality. Even if we have a common message, we present it rather differently.
Mm-hmm. Very well, but since we're talking about the elections, can you tell us about the first time you voted? Do you remember the first time, and what was your experience? What do you remember about it?
Well, I was actually, this made me think, because I was trying to remember when was the first time I voted, and I think it must have been, and I do have a recollection, it was the 1983 British general election. Now, that probably doesn't mean anything to you, but this was the absolute high tide of Margaret Thatcher's period in office. Mm-hmm. This was it was a huge victory for the Conservatives. Not in my area, but it was nationally, it was a huge victory for the Conservatives. So this was a memorable election that's gone down in history, and I remember thinking just how basic the whole thing was. It was a piece of paper with 3 boxes. It was the way the British elections are: 3 names, 3 boxes, you put a cross in one of them, and you're done. So that was the first time. A particularly memorable occasion voting was another British election, which was the 97 election, which was kind of the other end of the scale. That's when there was a landslide for the Labour Party with Tony Blair. I remember that one very well. But I think as a personal experience, the first time I voted actually in Belgium, where I live, because there's this possibility for citizens of different European countries to vote in another place where they lived, and I lived in Brussels. So I acquired the right to vote. A very different system. It's electronic vote. It's a machine. Use a machine to vote. It felt slightly more formalised than the British system had. But yes, there was the novelty of doing that and voting for Belgian candidates on a Belgian list, which I very gladly did.
Yeah. Yes, that's very typical for European Parliament, that it's a large institution that works mainly in 3 different locations, in Brussels, in Strasbourg, in Luxembourg. It also has the regional offices in every member state. And since you are the head of the regional offices of the European Parliament, you are the most suitable person to ask that what is the role of the regional offices and in the general work of the European Parliament.
So it's a little bit what I said. I mean, as a communication department in the European Parliament, we need to get our message out all across Europe. And you can only really do that if you understand the environment that you're working in. So if we were to try to decide everything in Brussels, like this is the way that we package our message, this is the language we use, this is the these are the channels that we will use and so on, the way we will set up an event, we would come unstuck very quickly, because you can't decide everything equally. You know, we are united in diversity, and it's the diversity bit that's important here. So Parliament needs people on the ground who know how things work where they are. The right way to talk to people, the right way to, to understand the local culture, what's going to work and what's not going to work, how people get their information. That can be very different, which social media channels they use, which TV stations they watch and things like that. All of that is vital knowledge in order to be able to pass on a message and communicate, in fact, two ways in the best possible way. I think it's also, the offices are important in terms of incoming information. So Parliament in Brussels needs to understand what's happening out there. You know, it's very easy to get stuck in a sort of bubble. We call it the bubble in Brussels, and you sort of you stay in that bubble, and everything has its own logic. You know, I think in America they call it the Beltway or something. It's the same sort of phenomenon. Whereas we need to know what's actually happening, and then we need people who can tell us, and those are those people in the offices. So this is the communication aspect. There's also the fact that we just need an interface with each place, and we're trying to get across the idea that the European Parliament and Europe generally is everywhere in Europe. It's not just in Brussels or in Strasbourg. It's not a distant thing which is only there. Everywhere is Europe, right? And one of the ways that we can demonstrate that is by being there and offering this interface with citizens, with stakeholders, with the media, and all kinds of things like that.
Exactly, as you mentioned, Europe is everywhere, and now at the end of May, elections are everywhere. We see the banners that European elections are coming. We see that they take place during the first week of June. Now, why do the European elections matter? How do they relate to everyday lives of the Europeans? And perhaps also, what, from your perspective, are the most tangible achievements of the European Parliament over the last 5 years?
So, elections matter for all kinds of reasons, from very, very practical, down-to-earth reasons to more what you might call idealistic reasons. Basically, an election is about choosing who's in charge, who's running the place, and a lot of our affairs these days, everywhere in Europe, are decided somehow, one way or another, in the European system. It's a level of governance that we're all in, and I think it's important that we understand that, and it's important that that level of governance is a democratic level of governance. It's not technocratic, it's not unelected, as some people like to say. Quite the opposite. This is a system which has a democratic element, which is the European Parliament, and the European Parliament sets the political direction of the European Union. So when you vote, and you vote according to your own wishes and ideology, if you vote left, if you vote right, if you vote green, you vote liberal, whatever you want to vote, those votes all come together. They create a European Parliament, which is then forms majorities and sets the direction which Europe will subsequently take, because basically all decisions, all laws have to go through that Parliament one way or another at the end of the day. So it's like any other system at the national level. The election decides the direction and the political composition. So, if you want Europe to look in a certain way, go and vote, participate in that process. If you need examples of what this Parliament does, so in the last mandate, of course, we've had a very unusual mandate. Last 5 years, very dramatic things have happened. I would start perhaps with the COVID pandemic, and this is, I think, one in a series of crises where you've seen how the European Union and the European Parliament, as part of that, has reacted better and better over time. So for me, the COVID pandemic is an excellent illustration of how the European institutions were able to react, take decisions that were for the benefit of Europeans generally. And this is very much the case when it comes to COVID, because of the vaccines. This could have been left to the national level, in which case we would have found ourselves with countries competing against each other, and perhaps the richest countries would have got the vaccines and the other ones would have had to wait in line and so on. Instead of which, thanks to the European Union and to votes in the European Parliament, we had a system whereby Europe was responsible for distributing vaccines. Everyone got their fair share, everyone got them at the same time. So that's, I think, we've kind of forgotten about it a bit now, but that was a very, very important thing. Then if you want to look at legislation, I can take an easy to understand example, which it's very popular. We like to use it because it's so obviously a good idea. The single charger for phones, so now phones and other small electronic items, rather than having a different charger for everything and throwing it all away and creating all this waste and so on, now we will have a single charger with a USB-C connection which you use for everything. And that's, again, a European law decided by the European Parliament and will actually have a very concrete, practical, maybe small effect on people's lives. If you want a bigger effect and you want to go a little bit sort of more idealistic, media freedom. You know, there were worries about the freedom of media, the independence of media. Some places in the European Union, Europe and the European Parliament passed the Media Freedom Act, which guarantees plurality of media, independence of media, puts mechanisms into place to make sure that that is maintained. If you need another example, it's been a very busy legislature. Ukraine, there again, a huge crisis, which is obviously the Ukrainian crisis. It's also something which affects us all because it's an attack somehow on all of us and on our values. There, the European Parliament has been leading the way, including through its president and her own actions, leading the way in responding to that, maintaining a united front, making sure that we, as it were, stand for Ukraine, to use the slogan. And I think that has been a very effective political stance. So, you know, we have different things. We have the legislation, big and small. We have management of a situation of a crisis, and then we have the big geopolitical issue of Ukraine. So these are all examples of things the Parliament has done.
Really issues that concern us all, but at the same time, during the first week of June, altogether more than 350, I guess 370 million Europeans will go to ballot boxes. So now the question from the individual perspective, why is voting important? How would you convince a non-voter who thinks that my voice doesn't count, how to convince them to go and vote in the upcoming elections? How can an average person, a Jan or Mari in Estonia, get involved in have their voice heard at the European level?
Well, it's like every election. Every vote counts, and for different reasons. Firstly, you vote in order to get what you want, and it's the point I made at the beginning. I mean, most of us, we have convictions, we have ideals, we want things to go in a certain direction, and when you vote for someone who is aligned with your way of thinking, and they will go and represent that position in the European Parliament. Of course, you need a lot of people to do that, and this is why, you know, this is why we have political parties. This is why supporters come together. But every vote counts, and if you look at some recent elections, I think the recent Polish election was a very interesting example of this, where a lot of people mobilized. They saw the importance of everybody being on board. And if there'd been people there saying, nah, it's not for me, I'm not bothered, what difference does my vote make? Well, if everyone said that, then things wouldn't have changed. Agree or disagree with the change, but it did bring about a change. So yes, everyone's vote is important in terms of outcomes. I would also say, and turning it round, it's a slogan that we're using, if you don't vote, others will decide for you. And then just think about that for a second. What do we mean when we say that others will decide for you? Maybe others who do not share your views. This is an example I would use, like Brexit, where I think a lot of young people said, that's politics, it's not for me, what difference does it make anyway? And abstention amongst younger people was quite high in the Brexit referendum in the UK. Maybe if those people had actually decided, no, I'm going to go and vote, then the result would have been different. As it was, others decided for them. And they decided in a way I suspect that most younger people in the UK didn't like. And this could happen at any level, including at a European level. If you want more reasons, I mean, there are others too. Firstly, I actually believe that it's a responsibility. We're citizens, we live in democracies. One of the rather small obligations and responsibilities I think that places on us is to participate, to actually say, to contribute to this democracy, to be part of it. So there is a kind of a civic duty, if you like. I think that's something which, you know, we don't talk about a lot. It's not something we think about much. In some countries, it's actually compulsory to vote. There are a few countries in Europe that make it compulsory. That's not necessarily necessary. I think that we should just recognise that it's not much to ask, especially when there are so many different ways you can do it. And here you could do it online, or you could go in person. You can actually change your mind, I believe, the way it works here. So, you know, it's not much to ask. And then there are maybe a couple of other things I'd say. Firstly, actually, and this is going to sound silly, but it's kind of fun sometimes, especially if you get people together. When I go and vote in Belgium, it's everyone sort of comes together and you meet people there and you have a chat and you say, okay, what's going on here? And, you know, maybe take some friends. We're saying this to a lot of people now. If you're going to vote, well, get a group of friends together and go and make a sort of a morning out of it somehow. That's a nice thing to do. And then finally, there's going to be the big reason, and I think this is about democracy. Right? And we're saying this in that campaign this year, that you know, democracy is not something you can take for granted. Okay, most younger people have grown up in a democratic world. It's just normal. It's the air we breathe, water we drink. But it's not necessarily so. And if you look around the world at the moment, outside the European Union, you see what's happening in Ukraine, in Russia. You know, there are autocratic tendencies kind of all over the world. Even inside Europe, we have all this misinformation, disinformation, we have extremism, all of this. I think we should worry about it sufficient to say, no, we want to stand up for democracy. This is our way of doing things. This is the way we Europeans want to live. This is the message that we're giving to the outside world. And if we all go out, you know, in large numbers, vote for our European Parliament, vote for the direction of Europe, we are also saying to the rest of the world, this is how you do democracy, Mr. Putin. And, you know, whatever. This is how we do it. This is how we want to run our lives. And the more we vote, the stronger that democracy is.
It's very good. So we have heard the main reasons to go to vote. I think this also motivates young people because, especially in Estonia, we see that young people are very Europe-minded. They see Europe already as a part of their everyday life. Actually, for first voters, they're born in the European Union already. So since this year it's 20 years. But still, the participation rate among young people, first voters, is the lowest. We see that people who are already used to vote, they kind of, maybe it's also part of their experience. They have seen that the vote really counts. But for the young people, it's taken as granted, but perhaps it should not be taken as
changed. It went up, youth participation went up more than overall participation last time. Perhaps we can do that thing again and see that youth participation go up even further and, you know, get up to the level of the general turnout. That would be great. Yes,
so I think this is, that the time is up, we have to finish, but I think this is the important message that make your voice heard, go to elections on starting on 3rd of June in Estonia and until 9th of June, and I think then we will have the results that we really want, not that somebody else wanted.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aitäh.
Thank you.